Time having arrived and a quorum being present, I hereby call this meeting of the Brockton Finance Committee to order. Mr. Clerk.
Item number 1, public hearing. Ordered that the common necessity and convenience of the inhabitants of the city of Brockton require the laying out and acceptance of Deanna Road, extending from Sinclair Road to Southfield Drive, and for that purpose it is necessary to take an easement for highway purposes and lay out as a public street or way of said city of Brockton, said easement passing by or over lands of those persons shown on Exhibit A, attached hereto, and parties unknown. Said layout of said street being 50 feet in width is shown more particularly on a plan entitled Southfield, Section 1, Brockton, Mass., developed by Braintree Homes, Inc., scale 1 foot to 100 feet, June 15, 1961, drawn by Bradford Sivets and Associates, Inc., Consulting Civil Engineers, Quincy, Mass., recorded at Plymouth County Registry of Deeds as Plan 91 of 1962 in Plan Book 12, page 465, to which reference is hereby made for a more particular description. The land taken is more fully described as follows. All the land within the limits of a private way known as Deanna Road, supposed to belong to parties unknown, being a strip of land 50 feet in width, extending from Sinclair Road easterly and northerly, a distance of about 2,195 feet, more or less, to Southfield Drive, as shown in the previously described plan, and to which reference is hereby made for a more particular description. And we have considered and estimated the damages sustained by all persons who have not waived damages in their several estates as follows. No awards. Invited, Patrick Hill, Commissioner of DPW.
Time having arrived, I declare this hearing open. You're here in favor. Is anyone else here in favor? Mr. Hill, what would you like to say this evening? Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, councilors. These roads were identified through our pavement condition index program, Street Logics, when I was speaking with the Ward 4 councilor. Both of these roads, Deanna and Dondi, both will require substantial improvements to bring them back up to speed, so we support this effort.
Thank you. This is the first of a number of roads in Ward 4 that we will be addressing over the next several years.
I hope they're all this easy.
And I'm delighted about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here in favor? All right, then I'll close that part of the hearing. Is there anyone here in opposition? Okay, if not, I declare that portion of the hearing closed. The question comes on approving this, councilors? All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. It carries. Mr. Clerk.
Item number 2, ordered that the common necessity and convenience of the inhabitants of the city of Brockton require the laying out and acceptance of Dondi Road, extending from Grinnell Road northerly to Southfield Drive, and for that purpose it is necessary to take an easement for highway purposes and lay out as a public street or way of said city of Brockton, said easement passing by or over lands of those persons shown on Exhibit A, attached hereto, and parties unknown. Said layout of said street being 50 feet in width is shown more particularly on a plan entitled Southfield, Section 1, Brockton, Mass., developed by Braintree Homes, Inc., scale 1 foot to 100 feet, June 15, 1961, drawn by Bradford Sivets and Associates, Inc., Consulting Civil Engineers, Quincy, Mass., recorded at Plymouth County Registry of Deeds as Plan 91 of 1962 in Plan Book 12, page 465, to which reference is hereby made for a more particular description. The land taken is more fully described as follows. All the land within the limits of a private way known as Dondi Road, supposed to belong to parties unknown, being a strip of land 50 feet in width, extending from Grinnell Road northerly, a distance of about 853 feet, more or less, to Southfield Drive as shown in the previously described plan, and to which reference is hereby made for a more particular description. And we have considered and estimated the damages sustained by all persons who have not waived damages in their several estates as follows. No awards. Invited, Patrick Hill, Commissioner of DPW.
The time having arrived, I declare this hearing open. You're here in favor of it, Mr. Hill?
I am in favor of this one as well.
And what would you like to say? Anything in additional?
I will just note that this one has a little bit lower of a pavement condition, and that the street, like the other one, both require a substantial amount of work to be brought up to city standards.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here in favor? Okay, then I declare that portion closed. Is there anyone here in opposition? And I declare that portion of the hearing closed as well. The question comes on granting this. All in favor? All opposed? Thank you, it carries. Mr.
Item number 3, ordered that the following named sum be and the same is hereby transferred, as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer of $239,000 from Auditor's Personal Services non-overtime, $239,000, to Auditing Mail Purchase of Services, $127,000. Auditing Purchase of Services, $110,000. Auditing Personal Services Overtime, $2,000. In order to cover unanticipated expenses for the remainder of the fiscal year. Invited Karen Praval, City Auditor, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Chair and City Councilors. I'm requesting a transfer of personal services to cover $2,000 for overtime for my staff. There was one member, our administrative assistant, 3 staff that's been working on doing a lot of the contracts, and so there was overtime that was needed during the time that we were short-staffed over the last couple of months. So I was looking for overtime to cover the work that she's had to do over the weekends and the evening over the last couple of weeks and for the next couple of weeks coming up. The second was $127,000, and this is for our mailroom. Our mailroom, we spent $211,000 last year. Currently, we're at $276,000. The mail that we process is for the entire city, and our FY24 budget reflects the amount of service that we may need to use in terms of delivering mail. The machine that we currently use is Pitney Bowes, and we have contacted them, and so what we'll be doing in the future so that we can monitor how much mail goes out is that we're going to be able to label each mail by department, and so if there's hearings where we have to, we have additional hearings, or if we have letters that have to go out or special mailings from different departments, we'll be able to identify prior to the mail going out what departments, are mailing more items than last year, and we'll be able to put a control on, what's sent out. The third line item is our purchase of service line item, and this is for auditing. We have 3 different consultants, and this is a contractual obligation. Last year, this budget was reduced by around $100,000. We have 3 contracts. One is with Pam Woods. She's a Munis consultant. We pay around $90,000 a year. She's under contract, and so she assists the auditing department, the school department, and several other departments with different transactions and services that we use for Munis. And with the upgrade, we've utilized her services more than we have in the past. We have a CPA, Dominic Capola. His hours have been reduced based from last year just because we're now fully staffed. So a lot of the services that he provided in the past, we are now taking them on between myself, assistant auditor, and just being fully staffed. And then we have Clifton Larson Allen, who is our outside auditors, and this transfer is more for the services for this auditing firm because it's contractual, and we're obliged to pay the contract value for this. So I'm asking for the increase to these 3 different areas.
Thank you. Councilors? Councilor D'Agostino.
You said this, I just didn't quite catch the numbers when you said them, so I just wanted to ask if we can go back to mail purchase of services. What was the number you said this year to date had been spent?
We've spent $276,000, $774.44.
All right, so 276, and last year you had spent 211?
211, that's correct.
Okay, and what was the amount in this line item in your budget that we approved last year? Do you happen to have that?
The budget was for $173,500.
73. So you're already like 100,000 over budget, is that?
That's correct.
Okay.
And yes.
If you're 100,000 over budget, I guess I'm just wondering why this didn't come in front of us previously.
We discussed this about a couple of months ago, and I've been working with the CFO. We realized at the time, as we were putting together the FY24 budgets, that there was more mail being delivered, which I'd mentioned this might have been a couple of months ago. And a lot of times for the mailroom, everything is based off of the meter. So we have to send the postal service, money in advance so that we have money in the machine. So if we have a large mailing that has to go out and there are no funds in the post office, then we can't mail out a letter or whatever the mailing is for a particular company. But this I did see probably about a month ago when it had come up, and then I made sure that it came to council so that we could do this transfer.
Okay. I mean, was there I guess I'm just wondering how you're 100 over and why you're not, I mean, when you started to approach your budgeted amount, why wasn't that the time to come in and say, hey, guys, we're going to come up short here, we got to be able to send mail out?
I think for this particular budget, as I look at previous years, there were different transfers that are done. Sometimes there's chargebacks. We'll say if there's elections and money's being paid for. So if you go back over the last few years, you'll see different transfers of expenditures being made to different departments. So as I was going through that, I realized that there weren't any transfers. There was a couple of items that we received money from elections, and then once it was reconciled, then I had a final number. And then I just made sure that, going into FY24, as this is a budget that is under my authorization, I need to make sure that we had enough funded for the future, because it's hard to know what mail is going to go out if you're, that comes through our
Right.
office.
So was there any one or particular items that pushed you over like this, or is it just several just day-to-day rudimentary things that just added up?
I think it's day-to-day. We have the street openings. So for a lot of the street openings, we're paying not just regular, but everything has to be certified. It has to go at a certified mail. So you're looking at almost 50, and then depending on how many abutters there are. And then you have the school department. I think that this is an area where we're going to be able to have more control of what's going out when we have the machine actually registering and monitoring what departments are sending mail out. Mail is something that we don't stop the mail from going out, because there's certain things that we're required to, send to different residents and different abutters, depending on whatever the hearings are. But I think with the change of how we're utilizing the system, and now that we'll be able to track each department, I think we'll have more control over, knowing what that expense level is. If we have a large mailing that goes out in 2 weeks, and then, we're looking at the budgets monthly, we may not see that. We're putting other controls within the system. With the upgrade of Munis, we're now going to be putting in measures. There's different controls that we can put in the system. So at 80%, everything pretty much gets shut down, so departments won't be able to process, payments as they get close to their spending limit. So we're over the last year been really looking at what internal controls that we can change so that this can be monitored, so we don't run into the situation where, we're coming to the council at the last minute to make adjustments.
Well, and I think that's really the issue, and so this is more of a statement, and hey, I'm one of 11, maybe I'm the only one that feels this way. You went $100,000 over before deciding to come into the council and say, hey, guys, I'm running out of money here. I think, for me anyway, and again, I'm one of 11, so my preference would have been, when you knew you were getting close, come in then and say, rather than going $100,000 over budget and then coming in and saying, hey, by the way, I need some more money for this. My preference would have been, when you knew you were coming down to the wire, to come in at that point. But that's just my preference. So thank you for the information. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Councillor Farwell.
Just very quickly to clarify, Actually, to expand upon what Councilor D'Agostino said, I thought we monitored accounts almost monthly and the balance remaining in the account, and I'd like to say that I support what Councilor D'Agostino said. I think it's, I don't want to use the word irresponsible. I guess I would say it's unacceptable to me to continue to deficit spend, figuring that we're going to approve the money. And I would say to you, because you're too young to remember what we went through in the 1990s, but if a department head overspends their appropriation under the law that created the chief financial officer's position, you are personally liable to cover that. If for any reason we said, no, we're not going to give you the $100,000, because it's been spent under your direction or approval, I mean, you'd be on the hook for it. So I would say to Mr. Claxon, I hope for fiscal year '24 we don't do this again. I don't think it's right. I don't think that we should have someone deficit spend and then come in and say, I need the money. And I'm fully in support of doing that this evening. But I also want to ask about the purchase of services. No, strike that, the consultants. I think you said we're under obligation to pay consultants and we did not have sufficient funds to do so. Did I hear that?
That's correct. So we have a contract with CLA, and there's around $150,000 that's in their contract that we haven't paid, and it wasn't encumbered prior to me coming here. So this is a contract that was for FY '23, and in the past, they've been paid based off of invoices that they've submitted. So I was looking at their contract that they have for this past fiscal year, they're still working on FY '22 audits. I realized that there was not enough funds within this budget, and so I asked prior to us going into the red that this be encumbered, but it was not aware at the time. And I think this was, based off this budget being cut. I don't know if people were aware that we had a contractual obligation. One thing that we're doing is, as we move into having contracts, we're trying to encumber the entire amount of the contract that we'll know what's left to pay a particular vendor. In this case, there wasn't one. And so when I was reconciling this budget and looking at the current contract that was signed, I realized there were invoices that they hadn't submitted. So I wanted to make sure that this money's encumbered, so as invoices come in and they submit them, that would have sufficient funds in the budget.
All right, well, are we in agreement that going forward, we will not sign a contract and encumber money that isn't there?
That's correct.
You have to have it in the appropriation, because once again, we've got to do this because I don't want to negate our obligation, but it just seems we need to be pretty clear that if you've got X amount of dollars and you don't have enough of that contract, then we don't sign it. Or there should, I hope there's an escape clause that these contracts are always subject to funding.
Yes, that's correct. That was part of the process that we changed when I first came in, is making sure that as we encumber funds, we're not encumbering funds just to pay an invoice. That was a past practice, that we're encumbering it for the total contract value.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you,
Welcome.
Madam Chair.
Anyone else? Thank you. I would just like to echo both Councilor D'Agostino's and Councilor Farwell's comments. We cannot have deficit spending. This is a lot of money to be asking for, weeks before the end of the fiscal year. We can't see this again, Ms. Preble. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion to recommend favorably back to the full city council.
Second.
Thank you. A motion's been made and properly seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. It passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 4, ordered that the following named sum be and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Appropriation of $100,000 from certified free cash $100,000 to Planning and Economic Development 40R Smart Growth Fund $100,000. Invited Rob May, Director of Planning and Economic Development, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Good evening, Mr. May.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, councilors. I'm here to write something that happened a while ago. In 2020, the city received a smart growth dividend of $200,000. City Council accepted those funds and put them into two different accounts. $100,000 was put into an impact account at the request of Councilor Nicastro, and $100,000 was appropriated to the Planning Department under the 40R budget line. That was going to be used for future planning projects in the Campello neighborhood. Unfortunately, those funds weren't treated like a grant where they roll over to the next year, and they have subsequently returned. They weren't expended in that fiscal year. They were returned to the city under general revenue. They've now been certified as free cash, or they're in that free cash pool. And I'm here before you today to ask that we restore those 40R funds specifically for the Campello planning process, which we are in the middle of. We have a large grant from Mass Housing Partnership, but the amount of work that we want to do is more than what Mass Housing has, or Mass Housing Partnership has provided for us. And so we were able to, we would like to come back to you and use this money as a match to the funds that we have from Mass Housing Partnership and finish up the Campello planning work.
Thank you. I sponsored this. Councilor D'Agostino and I are knee-deep in this Campello neighborhood project, and I support this wholeheartedly. It's just something that happened. The funds should have been set aside precisely to be used this way, and unfortunately, they were not.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Actually, Councilor Azak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Mesa, will this 100,000 additional, will that be enough, or do you?
Yes, ma'am, that will be enough.
Okay, will it be too much?
No, it won't. It's right on the money.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else?
Motion to recommend favorably?
Thank you.
Second.
Second. Okay, motion's been made and properly seconded. All in favor? And opposed? Thank you.
And the
It
next
carries.
public meeting is June 28th. I hope to see you all there.
That's right, at the South Middle School,
South Middle School, 6 o'clock.
6 p.m.
Item number 5, ordered that the following name sum be and the same is hereby transferred, as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows: transfer of $1,300 from Finance Other Contract Services, $1,300, to Finance Out-of-State Travel, $1,300, in order to cover unanticipated expenses for the remainder of the fiscal year. Invited, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Good evening, Mr. Clarkson.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the council. Thank you. This request is actually to fulfill something that I've talked to you about quite a bit in my tenure here. We try to accurately reflect our expenses in the budget lines where they're most specifically occurred. So as you know, and you've heard the mayor and I speak about frequently over the last year, we have traveled to Washington, D.C. A couple of times now, seeking earmarks. We traveled to Cape Verde last December, and so some of those expenses have been incurred in my budget, so we're seeking this transfer just so that we can accurately reflect those expenses where they belong in the budget.
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second.
Okay, a motion has been made and properly seconded, councilors. All in favor? Opposed? I think it carried. Thank you.
Item number 6, ordered that the City Council authorizes the acceptance and expenditure of a donation in the amount of $1,000 from Northeastern Savings Bank to the Brockton Police Department. The donation is for the First Responder Community Jamboree. Invited, Brenda Perez, Police Chief, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Councilors, Chief Perez notified me last week that she is unable to be with us. She sent her capable Captain Williamson to be here. Does anyone have an objection to hearing from Captain Williamson? No. Good evening, Captain.
Good evening. As stated, it's a donation from Northeastern Savings Bank to go to the First Responder Community Jamboree. That's similar to the events like the Night Out Against Crime. It's not the same event, but it's similar. It's a community building campaign that promotes police partnership with the neighborhood. They have, they put on an event, they have face painting station, arts and crafts, the dunk tank, and this will help with some of the expenses.
Captain Williamson, do you know when the Jamboree will be held this year?
I do not. I know it was held in August last year, so it would probably be, I don't have the date yet, but it'll probably be August.
Okay, thank you. Councilors?
Motion to recommend favorable.
Second.
Motion's been made and properly seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you, it carries. Thank you, Captain.
Thank you.
Item number 7, ordered that the following named sum be and the same is hereby transferred as the same was submitted by the mayor as follows. Transfer of $10,000 from Board of Health Personal Services non-overtime, $10,000, to Board of Health overtime, $10,000, in order to cover unanticipated expenses for the remainder of the fiscal year. Invited Dr. Reno Mondesir, Board of Health Executive Health Officer. Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Is Dr. Mondesir here? Okay, Mr. Clarkson, good evening, you're up.
Not, I'm happy to answer on his behalf. So this is the health department, due to some shortages and some of the demands, is incurring additional costs. And as we frequently do with other larger departments, particularly fire and police, they have some available funds in their regular salaries, and so we're just seeking to transfer some of those funds to cover those expenses.
Mr. Clarkson, have you any idea what they're using the overtime for?
For the, I believe, and I'm not certain, I have discussed this at some length with Dr. Mondesir, because they also operate off of a pretty substantial Department of Public Health grant that we monitor in my office. So I believe this is more his regulatory inspectional expenses.
Okay, for overtime.
Yes.
Okay, councilors? Councilor Farwell.
It's $10,000, which someone might say is an insignificant sum, but it's not insignificant. I'm going to recommend this favorably. However, prior to our vote at council to formally approve this, I want to know which position, who earned the overtime and the purpose for it and the position that they hold.
You bet.
I mean, it's public record anyway. I'm not,
It sure is.
I don't usually get into that minutia, but the Board of Health deserves a little bit of scrutiny. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Councilor Tavares.
Yes. Actually, I'm going to be second. The reason why I'm support that, because I used to be code enforcement, and I'm totally appreciated if everyone support this, because definitely with the Board of Health, like, short staff all the time, as we know, and there's a lot of people work to do because they don't have a system to work on it. Most of the time, they got to do the paperwork, and then Saturdays, a lot of call and complain because when I work there, we got to work some Saturday to cover all the hours, and then to finish the paperwork. Like I said, sometimes we have 10 complaints, 20 complaints. It is a lot of work to do so, and I wish even they can do more, and I appreciate if everyone support that.
Thank you. Councilors? Oh, Councilor Rodriguez.
I was not going to say anything tonight, but I think I have to.
Okay.
I second what Councilor Farwell is saying, because one of the issues that I'm having here is that we have 25 days left in this fiscal year. And for some odd reason, when it gets to the end of it, it's almost like there's a spending spree in this city, where we want to burn through whatever funds are left because we can't put it away for a rainy day. So is it safe to assume that the Board of Health had endured somewhere around $110,000 in overtime during the fiscal year, since there's only 25 days left in the year? I mean, this is actually a question that I would ask the executive director, because it sounds like $10,000 just to cover what the remainder of the fiscal year, which is only 25 days old. It seems to be a lot. And I'd like to know what those funds are going to be honest with you, because it seems to be Because if in 25 days, we're going to spend $10,000 in overtime, what are we spending in the other, 240 some odd days?
Yeah, consistent, Council, with what Council Farwell requested. We'll give you a full accounting of what's been expended and what positions those people hold. The annual budget for the overtime is nowhere near $100,000, but we'll give you a full accounting.
But do you see the concern, the fact that we're spending $10,000 in 25 days? And to me, I just want to make sure that we're not going through the books and just kind of burning through whatever cash we have left over the fiscal year for fear of what's going to happen next year. So I would want to know that prior to voting on this item myself, to be honest with you.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Would anyone else like to speak who has not spoken? All right, then Councilor Farwell.
Just through the chair to Councilor Rodriguez, I think you're going to find the money's already been spent, if I'm hearing the CFO properly. And that goes back to a prior discussion that we've got to stop that.
Yeah, we're spending funds that we don't have.
Spending has got to stop because it just is not a good practice. So thank you, Madam Chair. I'll look forward to the list coming in from Board of Health.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, councilors?
You have a motion. There was a motion made, seconded.
Okay, so a motion's been made and properly seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Opposed? Thank you. It is recommended favorably.
Item number 8, ordered that the City Council dedicate the following percentage, which may not be less than 25% of the local option excise on retail marijuana sales revenues collected under Mass General Laws, Chapter 64N, subsection 3, to the Community Impact Stabilization Fund established under Mass General Laws, Chapter 40, subsection 5B, effective for fiscal year 2024, beginning July 1st, 2023, or take any other action relative thereto. The following is yearly funded distribution generated from retail marijuana, up to 25% of total to hire and retain public safety personnel, up to 20% of total for DPW infrastructure, i.e. roads, water, and sewer, up to 15% of total to retain teachers and classroom support, up to 15% of total for youth programs and employment, summer jobs, up to 10% of total for parks improvements and recreational facilities, up to 10% of total for social services support, drug education and intervention, up to 5% of total for senior citizen support and the COA. If the percentage of the totals in these line items are not used in a fiscal year, the remainder of the line item shall remain in the stabilization account and added to the totals in the subsequent year. Invited, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer.
Good evening, Mr. Clarkson. Before we begin this discussion, I just want to say that the council wants to thank Ward 3 Councilor Mark D'Agostino for bringing to our attention, following an accounts committee meeting that he chairs, that this needed to be addressed. And I also wanted to ask our legislative counsel, Attorney Resnick, to come up and just speak on it briefly.
Hello, councilors. Councilor D'Agostino mentioned to me that there might be some sort of lingering issue with the stabilization fund, so I looked into it with Troy and Attorney Bridges, and basically the short end of it is that in 2019, this council took a vote to allocate money to a stabilization fund that did not exist. And the council in 2022 created a stabilization fund. So basically we have a vote from 2019 that really put money absolutely nowhere. So this is just taking that 2019 vote and putting it after the creation of the stabilization fund. So that's really what's being done here today. It's just clean it up to make sure that these funds that come in from the excise tax on retail marijuana sales go into the stabilization fund.
Actually, I'd like Councilor D'Agostino to go first, but then I'll call on you.
Okay. Why, thank you. Okay, so first I just wanted to thank, also on the accounts meeting where we found out about this, Councilor Texera was there and participated in that meeting, as did Councilor Lally. And what really where the credit should go is this was in relation to a constituent question about how the marijuana revenue is being used. And so we asked the CFO to come into accounts and discuss that, and that's how this came out. So it really was, and I mention this because I know a lot of times people feel like elected officials aren't listening, and I wanted people to know that this actually came about because a constituent asked. And so we looked into it and found that we needed to take this additional step. At any rate, I want to thank you for, and the law department for, digging into this and figuring out what needed to be done and getting this in front of us so we could just finish this up. And that's really all I wanted to say, and I just want to thank the other members of accounts for being a part of the discussion as well.
And just separately too, so there are separate fees from the host community agreement, those impact fees. That was done correctly in 2022. So those are going into the stabilization fund. It's just that, that tax for retail sales.
Councilor Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Shannon. So you said that the ordinance was established in 2019. The stabilization fund was established in 2022.
Correct.
So the funds that were generated in 19, 20, and 21, were they all held in the general and rolled over into the stabilization, or where did those go?
Well, I don't think we generated any funds in 2019 because you didn't have any shops open, right? I don't think you started to approve applications until 2020, so I think perhaps you probably didn't get sales until 2021. I'm guessing on that timeline, but there was nowhere for the money to go because you weren't bringing any money in. But currently, it just goes into your general fund.
Okay, so we created in 2022. So the funds generated this fiscal year will now go into that stabilization fund?
The funds collected after July 1st, 2023. It's effective next fiscal year.
Okay. So what about the funds? Were there any funds generated in fiscal year 2023?
Not my count.
Yeah, I'm just, you know where I'm going. I'm just so.
Yes, and so let me go back to fiscal year 22. We collected just about $2.2 million, $2,184,000 in fees, both from the tax and from the impact fees in FY22. That's last year. So far this year, we've collected $1,018,000 in taxes and $1.3 million in impact fees. So that's just about $2.3 million we've collected this year. Both last year and this year, all of those monies have gone to the general fund. There is, as we discussed at the meeting with Councilor D'Agostino, and as you may have heard, the Commonwealth has made some changes in how they believe the fees should be collected and have raised questions as to whether or not that the impact fees are properly assessed, not just by Brockton, but by any municipality. I won't offer an opinion on that. That's not my area of expertise. But we are making accommodations for projections for next year's revenues in case that becomes a certainty. So if, in fact, the Commonwealth does not allow municipalities to collect those impact fees moving forward, we've made accommodations in our revenue projections to look at only tax collections for next year.
Would there be any expectation of a clawback of the monies already collected? No.
No, I've asked that question of our legal team, and they believe that the answer is a firm no.
All right, so I do understand that the issue of impact fees are currently being litigated as whether they're proper to implement, so understood on that issue. So then another question, so we're saying up to a certain percentage total. Are those decisions all now made by the mayor's office or your office as to what the percentage will be for each category listed?
I should tell you, this language, and I have a copy of the 2019 vote of the council. It was actually January 9th of 2020 that I think it was introduced. That language, it mirrors that language from a few years ago. So Councilor Farwell and I had a policy discussion on that very question. I believe, and I think Attorney Resnick concurs, that because you're creating this fund, you have the ability in the creation of the fund to direct how the money is spent. Ultimately, the mayor makes recommendations to you and decides how all of the money is allocated in that big policy statement we call a budget. Given the sheer size and scope of our budget, these numbers are easily encompassed when and if we make a transfer from that stabilization to support the general fund efforts of the city.
Okay, so then the expectation is that we would not see individual expenditures from the stabilization fund to any of these categories. That's going to be done within the budgeting time.
Right.
Those monies will be sent into the overall line item.
I think, Councilor, not to interrupt, but I think that, to me, that's the cleanest way to do it, right? We're collecting this money. You're saying we want percentages expended in this certain way, and then we spend a lot more than that in the general budget and then use the marijuana funds to offset all of those costs.
Okay, so our job is to basically set up the parameters. Your job is to do the more fine-tuning of spending it as appropriate as you see. Okay, so that's all going to be done at budget time. There would be no later transfers, is essentially right?
Correct.
Okay, all right. I appreciate the information. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Councillor Farwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Attorney Resnick, not to muddy the waters, so to speak, but I did have a policy discussion with the CFO recently, and it surrounded a paragraph in General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 5B. And that particular paragraph, and it's unfair of me to read it to you, but I just want to make sure we're on firm ground with what we're doing. Notwithstanding Section 53 of Chapter 44, or any other general or special law to the contrary, a city or town district that accepts this paragraph may dedicate without further appropriation all or a percentage not less than 25% of a particular fee, charge, or other receipt to any stabilization fund established pursuant to this section. And here's where it gets a little interesting. Provided, however, that the receipt is not reserved by law for expenditure for a particular purpose. Now, it's pretty well settled that we can't appropriate money. Only the mayor can do that. And we have other stabilization funds, colleagues, that we have established that are, I think, in the millions. Don't we have one that's 7 or 8 million, Mr. Clarkson? Stabilization fund?
Yes, in fact, the retirement stabilization has 22 million.
So if we go forward and do this, aren't we in effect telling the mayor, you're going to receive this amount of revenue and you're going to have to appropriate it in an amount corresponding to the percentages in this order? And so those are the two questions that I'm troubled about, Attorney Resnick. Number one, it seems like we are dedicating this revenue for a particular purpose, and it seems like we're encroaching on the executive authority by identifying percentages of the total amount of revenue received to go to a specific purpose, which kind of takes it away from the chief executive's authority and discretion.
So I think you can do it both ways, Councillor Farwell. I think you can keep the language as proposed, because the stabilization funds, you are supposed to specify in the order what the funds are to be used for. And I think that that's what that percentages does. It meets that requirement. But I believe going back to 2019, when the stabilization allocation order came before the council, it left this out. So you could do it either way. It's just...
Well, I want to do it.
This is just a mirror from the version that was approved by this council in 2019, at the end of 2019.
I just want to make sure that whatever we do is compatible with General Laws, Chapter 40, 5B, and all of its provisions, that's all.
Yeah, I think it did. I actually went back and watched our minute meetings going back to 2019, and the same issue was kind of discussed, and it met the scrutiny back then as well, because you're supposed to specify the purposes of your stabilization fund.
And the other thing I'd just like to raise with my colleagues is that when these percentages were identified, that was before ARPA. That was before the bilateral infrastructure law. That was before CARES funding. Some of these percentages now, we might want to change. And I don't know when we want to do that, but I think it's worthy of a discussion. For example, 5% for senior citizen support. You know, is that still relevant today, back from 2019? 10% for parks improvement and recreational facilities. We've already dedicated a substantial amount of money from ARPA for parks and recreation. Should it go to something else? For example, it appears, although it's not completely defined yet, that the schools are having a financial issue this year. So would we want to look at dedicating more funding to the schools to offset some of the issues that they seem to be facing? So I'm not suggesting we change this now. I'm just suggesting that these percentages, when they were established, was based on information that has changed greatly since 2019. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Attorney Resnick, you remember in 2019 that this was actually my thing.
I remember I learned this today. I watched the videos. You were the acting mayor at the time.
No. I was on the ordinance committee when we first talked about this. Because I actually remember this verbiage that's actually here is exactly what I emailed our CFO to be introduced. This email, exactly how it is. The verbiage, the words, and everything else is exactly how I sent it.
Yep, and I think what we did is I think it might have gone forward as an ordinance, but because it's creation of a stabilization fund, it was probably had to be submitted by an order. So then in November of 2019, you would have been the acting mayor, and it went before the council with none of the breakdown. That was tabled. It was resubmitted with this breakdown and then approved by this council, really without much debate on it. I watched the videos today.
We wanted, at least the committee that I sat on when we were first discussing the ordinance that actually became the marijuana ordinance in the city, a lot of us felt strong enough that the funds generated from marijuana went back into the community for that purpose. Not to sit in the stabilization account, not to support anything else other than these items specifically. Because we wanted to make sure that the concerns that folks had at the time with marijuana in our community, that they could actually see some funds coming back into the community to help them with those issues. That's why some of us felt strong enough. It's too bad it was kept out of the November agenda in the sense, because the intent of the council that I was sitting on, as far as the committee is concerned, was to do it exactly this way. So I don't know exactly why it was left off or whatever the deal was, but this was the intent of this, because we wanted to make sure that there were funds across the board. And I'm going to disagree with Council Farwell that we cannot set this particular item in the sense, because we're not the executive branch, but the thing is, marijuana is not in anybody's book as to how it was done in the past. This is something brand new, where the community actually gets to charge a particular percentage that goes into the users of marijuana in this community. So those funds are going to come into the municipality in this sense. So it's really up to the municipality to decide how these funds are going to be spent. I don't think it should be left up to the mayor. I mean, the order should say, look, you're going to spend X, Y, and Z dollars on this, because that's what we do here. We pass laws that says how the city is governed, as long as we are staying within the Mass General laws, but we pass the ordinances in the city how we want the city to run, and the executive office takes that order and does what. Now, we're not saying in the item, for instance, the second from the bottom, it says, for social services support. We're not saying who gets it. That's up to the mayor and the executive branch to decide how that's going to be implemented. But I'd like to see 10% of those funds. We're talking about $1 million in a way. 10% is $100,000. You know, I like to see that go into social services to help us deal with the drug-related issues that we have going on in the city. So everything else, I know the ARPA funds came in and kind of muddied the water somewhat, but these things were designed to basically combat the effects of the marijuana and other drugs used in our city, to basically say, look, we're selling marijuana, but at least we're able to do some things to help our city deal with the issues surrounding drugs. So I feel very strongly about this, that it should continue to be as is, and then again, it's up to the executive office to decide how to go about it, but at least for us to get, and I think there was another piece that said we're going to get a report on a regular basis to tell us where these funds were going. You know, specifically to say who's getting them, how it's going, because honestly, I don't want to see it just sit there, because it has sat there for 2 years, you know, since this thing, the marijuana thing. I mean, we've had marijuana in the city now for about 3 years, you know, functioning for about 3 years, since 2020, you know, and this is 2023. So I like to see, you know, some things, some fruits coming out of this, this issue of marijuana in our community, and I think this is the way to go about it in terms of providing some funds of what this thing was intended to from the very get-go. You got that, Mr. Clarkson?
Yes, I understand, and I think what you're being asked to do tonight fulfills that.
But is there any way, let's say, okay, this goes into effect in July of this year, next month, basically. Is there any way that in, you know, quarterly we can get a report of where these funds are going? A distribution of exactly what we're talking about, this percentage, whether or not some of it is going, you know, $5,000 went to this program, $2,000 went to this program, and that kind of stuff, so that we are informed and let the community know that, yes, your marijuana fees are going to.
We most certainly can do that, but I just, as we've discussed before, when the money is transferred in to support the entirety of the city's efforts, there's not a straight line between the transfer and a specific program, but what we most certainly can do is highlight within these categories the work that's ongoing that this additional revenue is allowed to support.
Well, I don't see anywhere near a percentage that went for youth employment, and that's an item in here. You know, summer jobs, you know that's one of my pet peeves in terms of keeping kids busy and working during the summer or even after school in a way. I know we don't spend a great deal of resources towards that, and I like to see that, you know, because if revenues are coming in from marijuana, then we need to see, you know, those funds go back into the community in terms of jobs for young people in our community, and we're not doing that, you know, so somehow that needs to be put into play, because we can't just say, well, it's the marijuana funds are coming into the general fund to help the city, you know, buy balloons or something, when the intent was basically to decide, you know, some of those revenues need to go into jobs to help the young people in this community as well, into some preventive program for us to say, you know what, we've got some sort of a drug and alcohol prevention going, and we are utilizing the funds from the marijuana receipts. I think that's basically what it needs to be. Not that, well, we took it out of the general fund. Because the intent from the get-go was, yes, we're going to go and approve an ordinance from this city, and a lot of us were vocal enough to push it, to get it done. We took our time to get it done, knowing that some of these revenues will come back and assist the individuals mostly affected by this.
Got it. Understood.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Councilor Minichiello.
Hi there. I'm just looking for some clarification with regard to the language. So where it says that may not be less than 25%. Has it been decided that it is 25% of the excise on retail marijuana sale revenues, and underneath is 100% division or carving of that 25%?
My understanding is that this vote of yours sets those parameters up to that amount, but the discretion that we then speak of rests with the mayor who appropriates the money to determine within that guidance from you how exactly the money is appropriated.
We would expect to see that proposal from the mayor in the next budget cycle.
Yes, and you will. It's actually in your budget book, and you'll see that there is a line in the revenues for marijuana, but that's what I was talking about a minute ago, when you don't see a direct line between that revenue and the specific programs. But what Councilor Rodriguez just asked, and I agreed to do, was to do some additional work for you after that money begins to be spent after July 1st, to then be able to highlight some of those specific programs that are benefited by this money, and we're happy to do that.
So when you say not less than 25% of local option excise on retail marijuana, is that the complete, is that all of the funding that comes in on marijuana, or is that just a piece? That's a piece of several revenue streams from marijuana?
So we have two main streams, and just to recap, so far this year, we've received a little over $1 million, $1,018,000 in the cannabis tax. So that's money that is paid to the Commonwealth and comes back to us from the Commonwealth, very similar to how we receive the meals tax money. On top of that, there's the regular marijuana revenue, the impact fees, and we've received about $1.3 million so far this year in those impact fees. The future of the impact fees is uncertain because of action that's being taken by the Commonwealth. So the money of which I speak, just to be conservative and not to set the city up for any sort of failure or structural deficit, what we're counting on for next year is just the marijuana tax.
Okay, yeah, so I mean, just listening to Councilor Rodriguez, I'm just trying to grapple with how much really are we talking about from the total receipts coming in from marijuana? That, to me, is like, that's sort of the bigger picture, and, you know, how much is really going to these community issues of community concern and impact, you know? So that helps me better understand it. Thank you. So it's a portion. So it's a portion of a larger revenue stream.
Exactly, right.
Okay.
Was that, Councillor?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Councillor Tavares.
Hi, good evening, thank you again. Yes, actually, I just want to address a couple things, like, you know, just with my colleague, Councilor Rodriguez. As I'm new city councilor, which I've just learned a lot, and I hear so much, and special money for marijuana we have, but for some reason, I think literally we like to work with some organization in the community, because those organizations, like, you know, BMC, Food Stamp, a lot of organizations work with the people or family literally in need, because I know sometimes we literally not pay attention to the downside. Downside, I mean, like, you know, with the family literally in need and literally struggle. Last week, I did some little visit from, like, you know, BMC, DTA. It's just, I want to cry. Because those folks, they're working so hard to help a family in need, they don't have much resource. It's so sad we're talking about millions for marijuana, which is not fair for those folks. You know, give all those money to city. As I'm kind of understanding here, we have those money all sitting right there, not been done anything at all. It's just so unfair for them, because I believe if they totally know exactly where the money goes, like, you know, who used the money is being used very useful, I know they're going to be very happy as well to keep and give you more money. And then I basically, like, you know, as I can see it, it's not transparency between the city and the community. Because sometimes I go around, people ask me a lot of questions, I get so confused. I don't know how to answer none of those questions. But as of right now, I'm kind of literally understand it and comprehend the little things. Like I said, as a new city councilor, I think we should literally work more in the community, looking for more downside. Oh, sometimes not go pay attention to first-class people, because that's all sometimes we're most fortunate. We should just focus the people, like, you know, little struggle and work into those organizations struggling to, you know, helping people. And then we literally should, like, you know, stop it and Visit them, see what's going on, ask them questions. How can we work with them? How can we partner with them? And then I totally believe if we focus, use that money for that purpose, I don't think no one's going to have a problem. I don't think the BMC is going to be very happy, DTA and Cape Verdean Association, Asian organization. That is going to be very beautiful for everybody. And, I wish we can work with them and spend the money, this money with those organizations and supervise those organizations, see how many people's being served, and in the meantime, give you feedback for those people, give you money to the city. Hey, this is how much money we give for this organization. This is how many family they help, each organization, how many family they help. I totally appreciate if we kind of work with the more communication, transparency, and partnership with the people literally need. And not just to save you money. As a city council, we didn't even know exactly what the money has been there for. That's what I can say today. And again, I wish anyone can stop you by to all those organizations, talk to them, and literally learn from them. How can we work with them? That's what I can say for now.
Councilor, I think that's phenomenal, and I think we all began to understand how important it is to support those organizations who support the community when we allocated $2 million to help lift up more than 40 nonprofits in the city who are providing just that work that you speak about. And they really reached widely throughout the community, different community organizations that are serving our different populations and doing work throughout the city. So I think certainly both the mayor and I understand the importance of that, and I certainly hope that while it probably won't be at the level that we were able to do with the ARPA funds, that those partnerships continue.
All right, thank you so much. And
thank you, Councillor. Would anyone like to speak who has not spoken yet? Okay, Councillor D'Agostino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple things, and just as I was listening to different points being made that I wanted to go back and maybe talk a little more about. First, just a comment. I get what was said about, we've had ARPA, we've had CARES, and on the school side they had ESSER, and so you had all these different funding sources that have come in since then, but those are also short-term funds that have either been used or have to be used by 2025, and then they're gone. Am I correct about 2025? I thought that was the...
Specifically for ARPA, yes, it's committed by 24 and spent by 25.
Right. So this is a kind of a more of a long-term thing. We're going to have marijuana revenue most likely for a long time. And so I guess, yes, we've had those other sources come in, they're going to go away. So I don't know that we want to change the way we treat this money based on short-term funds that are going to disappear. So that's just my 2 cents on that. Where did we get, let me back up. I want to clarify, if I'm understanding this right, you get $1 million, let's just take the $1,018,000, I'm going to round it to $1 million to make the math easier for me. All right. What we're actually talking about is 25% of that. These allocations, it's not 10% of $1 million for social services. It's 25% of the $1,250,000 allocated throughout here. So it's 10% of 250. It's really $25,000, not $100,000, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Based on what this says, yes. Although all of the money that's collected from marijuana goes, the rest of the money as of July 1st goes to the general fund. So it will still generally support the parameters that you sought, but because it will all go to the city's general activities.
Right. Well, that brings me kind of to my remaining 2 questions. So 25% of it has to come out and be allocated this way. The other 75%, the other $750,000-ish, right, goes, where? Is that just, it's revenue that comes into the city and it's then, for lack of a better way to put it, goes into the general fund and it's baked into the budget and distributed and,
Correct.
okay.
Yes.
And it's not subject to these allocations. that 75%.
It is not.
Where did we get the 25%? Where did that number come from? Is that in the statute?
State law.
What's that?
State law.
It's the state law. All right. So the state law allows us to take 25% of it, and you're doing sign language back there.
Less than.
Right, and it says that.
I know.
Yeah, 25% is your minimum. You can do up to 100%.
Well, that's, so, all right, thank you. So that's what I was trying to get to, is the 25 isn't, we're not locked into that. In other words, we could go to 50, we could go to 70, we could go higher. The statute would allow this council to do that if we desired. Correct?
I believe it certainly does. I will tell you that, based on what I said a little bit ago, whether you allocate it to a stabilization fund that we then transfer out with your vote and support, of course, or it just goes in the general fund, the priorities that you've mentioned are all priorities in the budget anyway. So whether you allocate 25 or 100%, I believe that the policy priorities you're expressing with this vote are fulfilled.
Okay. So the 25, though, was just what did you say it was, I'm sorry, 2019, that number came out of just the debate and discussion of that council at that time, or no?
Yeah, I mean, I was present for those discussions. I believe the original language, as Councilor Rodriguez stated, were the outgrowth of the discussions the council had at that time. I was here for those discussions, but I obviously was not part of those discussions that the council had. So you'd have to rely on the folks that were part of those discussions.
Okay. And then one final thing, because if I, personally, and I don't know if any other councilors feel this way, since we have the discretion to make that 25 larger, and I don't know that we need to go to 100, but something, because when you really look at 25% of $1 million, and then you break it down, 5% going to the COA, 10, like it's not as much as you might think it is when you really realize that it's only 25% of that number. But if I'm not mistaken, holding this up to amend that or go through the ordinance process would be a problem as far as, because we're already collecting monies on that, right? My understanding was there was some kind of an urgency that this had to be taken care of quickly.
Well, I think what Attorney Resnick will tell you, and she certainly can come up, but the way this is written, this is going to be effective for next year starting July 1. So if you want this to be effective for next year, then you need to have the vote in this fiscal year. Otherwise, you have to wait another year to make it valid,
Right,
correct?
okay.
Yeah.
That's
so
what I was
that's
looking
the
for.
urgency.
Right, and we wouldn't, procedurally, there's no way we could change this before the end of the fiscal year. So we would have to let this go as is, and then next fiscal year, we could discuss whether we wanted to make changes, and we'd have the year to figure that out. But basically, we kind of got to do this the way it is, or we miss the deadline, basically. Right, and if we miss that deadline, basically 100% of the money just goes to the general fund, and this isn't in operation, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right now, all of the money is going into the general fund.
Right, okay. All right, yeah, no, I mean, I think, maybe we'll have some future discussion about this in the coming year, but I think just timing-wise, probably time does not allow us to do that. So, thank you. Those were all the questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Farwell?
Just to clarify, Mr. Claxon and Attorney Resnick, I don't believe we identified a percentage. I think this 25%, again, came from the statute. I mean, I was here in 2019. I don't think the council put in a phrase indicating 100% of the revenue shall be deposited into the stabilization fund, or 50%. So if I would think, and I would defer to legislative counsel, that's something that should be in this order, that this should be amended, and we should specify that we want, beginning July 1st, 2023, 50% of the marijuana revenues to go into the stabilization, or 100%, because otherwise I think we've left out a material decision.
Yeah, I think you can do that tonight. This was submitted so that you could have that conversation on that, the bracket of 25% to 100. But it's not an ordinance, so you could make a motion tonight to amend the language, and then it goes back to the full city council for passage. It's not something that needs an additional reading. You can, instead of say, where it says may not be less than, you can say which shall be. And as long as that number is bigger than 25, you've met the state statute requirements.
By the way, before I forget, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
Make a motion?
You know what, I'm going to yield, and I think Councilor Rodriguez wants to be recognized.
Councilor Rodriguez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Madam Chair, Councilor Falwell, didn't you just go over to some sort of a state law that said that only 25%?
No, the 25%, as I recall, when
No, I'm saying from the law that you...
Oh, from the law, yeah.
Quoted.
Chapter 40, Section 5B. It says that not less than 25% of a fee. It could be any fee.
Oh, okay, then.
But not
Okay,
less
all
than 25% can be set aside. But we didn't set aside anything.
Right.
So
When, through the chair, when we did this, our intent, at least from that committee, was that all revenue from marijuana was going to go for these particular items in the community, all of it. Somehow, the 25% showed up in the order, but the intent was that we wanted the executive branch to make sure that from the marijuana receipts, that 25% went to this, 20% went to that, 5% went to here, and whatever. So all of the marijuana revenue. So if I can, and after it's all said and done, I like to make that amendment so that all revenue from marijuana would go into the stabilization account for the purposes that it's stated in this particular order.
Yes.
All of it.
just
And then it's up to, again, it's up to the mayor to basically say, you know what, I'm going to, from the marijuana receipts, I'm going to allocate 25% of that whole number to hire and retain public safety personnel. And basically state, oh, from the marijuana receipts last year, we were able to put X dollars into the public safety budget from the marijuana receipts, so that at least we know that those funds are going to the items that we somehow indicated on this particular thing. We're not telling them how to do it, but we want to see that a percentage of what we told them is going into those particular funds.
Councilor Farwell?
through the chair, back to you, Councilor Rodriguez. If this is just an order that could change, for example, for fiscal year 25, then I would agree with you. Put 100% in.
And then we'll see what happens.
See how it goes, and if we screw up, we'll fix it.
Exactly.
If we did the right decision, we'll all be very pleased.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I still have the floor, I need to ask Troy Clark, our CFO, one question, because he brought it up. I wasn't going to ask, but since he brought it up, I'm going to ask him. Mr. Clarkson, you said that you brought up the $2 million that we used from ARPA for the agencies, the nonprofit organizations in the city. Have we done anything in terms of keeping tabs at these organizations to make sure that they've done what they said that they were going to do?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And
is there any way we can see that report?
Yes, most definitely. We keep very close tabs on that. In fact, those funds have been distributed in quarterly allotments, and each subsequent quarterly allotment was not issued unless those agencies provided the proper documentation. So we have all that, and happy to provide it to you.
Yes, so there are 40 of them supposedly,
Correct.
right? So can we can get a breakdown exactly what Agency A did with the funds that they actually received?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have meticulous detail on that.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing that question, and thank you, Mr. Clarkson.
Okay, I'm unclear on what we're doing here. At this point, we have an order that says the following percentage which may not be less than 25% of the local option excise on sales, on retail sales revenues. Councilor Farwell.
Recognizing this is your order, so I apologize, but where it says that the city council dedicates the following percentage, which may not be less than 25%, and the council determines 100%. I would make an amendment to the order saying, and the council determines 100% of the local option excise on retail marijuana sales collected, et cetera, et cetera.
Second.
For clarity, you could just, so that was kind of put in there like as a bracket, like the number that we're going to put in this little, the comma section.
Okay.
Can't be less than 25. So you can just do that the city council dedicate
All.
100% of the local option excise.
Okay.
That language was for council to fill in. So you're dedicating 100% of the local option excise on retail marijuana.
I still second it.
So it would read that the city council dedicates 100% of the local,
Option excise on retail marijuana sales revenues.
so we would delete which may not be less than 25%?
Correct.
All right.
And the following percentage. All right, councilors, a motion's been made and properly seconded. Any conversation on the motion?
This is an
The
amendment.
amendment.
Yeah, an
Just to amend.
Yeah, to amend it. Councilor
On the
D'Agostino.
motion, I just had a quick procedural question. I thought you had said earlier we couldn't amend this now.
No, I said we could. This isn't an ordinance, so it's not like you need to have X amount more readings. This is an order.
Oh,
So
I
once,
misunderstood
if
you.
this council approves it as amended, it goes back to the council for their meeting at the end of June, which will pass, assuming the mayor signs, before the July 1st date.
Oh, I misunderstood you. Thank you.
All set.
Okay. So on the amendment,
All those in favor?
all in favor? All right, all opposed? Thank you, it carries.
I
Now,
need a motion.
motion to recommend to the council as amended.
Second.
Second.
All right, motion's been made and properly seconded. All in favor? All opposed? Thank you, it's recommended favorably.
Item number 9, be it resolved by the Brockton City Council to invite representatives from Wildlands Trust and Old Colony Planning Council to provide an update on the DW Field Park Initiative and summarize results of the community survey recently conducted. Invited Karen Gray, President and Executive Director of the Wildlands Trust, Rachel Bruce, Director of Special Projects, Wildlands Trust, Mary Waldron, Executive Director, OCPC, Joanne Zigmund, Senior Planner, OCPC, Old Colony Planning Council. I don't want to shorten you.
Thank you. Good evening, Ms. Gray.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting us. My name is Karen Gray, and I'm the president of Wildlands Trust, and we really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you about our work in the city, and most specifically, our work in Field Park. I want to start by telling you I'm not here to ask for money, first of all. I'd like to take a minute to just tell you about Wildlands Trust. We are the regional land trust for southeastern Massachusetts. So our job within the region is to work with the cities and towns and to help them identify pieces of conservation land that can be protected for their citizens. We work right now in 55 different communities in a 1,700 square mile area, and we protect over 350 pieces of land. Our work in the city dates back to about 2010, and it's quite personal for me because I grew up in this city. I was born and raised here. So when there was an opportunity to come and work on a project to help protect the last piece of open space in the northwest corner of Brockton, the Brockton Audubon Preserve, it was really important to me to be part of that. So we got started in the city on the Brockton Audubon Preserve. We completed that project. We loved working with the city. We felt very welcomed here. We felt like we were doing something important for the city, and we looked to do something else. Our next project was to bring in private funds to do a restoration of your piece of conservation land that's adjacent to the Brockton Audubon land, the Stone Farm Conservation Area. From there, we moved on to do educational programs with the high school. We do a service learning program with high school students who are paid, have paid positions in the summer. And then we decided that we were going to look at something, a very bold project to develop a master plan for Field Park. And we started working with Tim Carpenter. We met with the mayor and Rob May and told them our vision for creating a master plan so we would have some shovel-ready projects when there was federal funding available. And everybody was very, very excited about it. And we're a couple years into it. We've brought almost $600,000 in private funding toward open space work in the city of Brockton. And I'm going to invite my colleague Rachel Calderara from Wildlands Trust, who's overseeing the project in the park, to tell you about what's happening there. And then Mary and Joanne are going to talk about OCPC's work to support this. So, thank you.
Thank you. I do have some handouts.
Sure. Yes, thank you. Good evening.
Thank you, Madam Chair, councilors. The handouts that you'll see coming before you are just a brief overview of the DW Field Park Initiative, which is just in phase 1. We've been working the past year to come up with some processes and secure partners to create a new master plan for DW Field Park. And as Karen mentioned, we've brought private funding to this initiative, and we're not here to ask you for money, just to let you know about the initiative and hopefully gain your support.
Thank you.
A big part of this has been working with the community and getting feedback and input from the community so that the plan that we put forward reflects the wants and needs of the community and not just our ideas as Wildlands Trust or our ideas as engineers or landscape designers working on this project. Joanne from OCPC is going to tell you about the fantastic survey response that we had from October through March from the community. And we are developing an outreach committee to continue to gather input from the community as the master plan goes forward. At the end of this year, we plan to have a completed master plan at the end of this calendar year, December, for the midsection of DW Field, which goes between Oak Street to the south and South Street to the north. With our funding for this initial phase, we did want to focus on the area of the park that is the most popularly used by the community for recreational purposes. So we chose that midsection just for this initial phase, and then we'll be expanding planning north into the Brockton Reservoir Loop and south into the south section of the park. At the end of this calendar year, we'll have shovel-ready projects, and we will be working with the city of Brockton and to apply for state and federal grants to fund those projects. And as Karen mentioned, we'll hope to be bringing private funding as well. So this is really just a way for us to invest in the community and collaborate and give back and make the park something that everybody wants it to be, I think. I'll turn it over to Joanne.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Good evening, Madam President, councilors. Old Colony Planning Council is excited to be working with Wildlands Trust on the DW Field Park Initiative. This park is an important regional gem, and we'd like to help bring additional investment into it. I'm going to be talking about the community survey that Rachel mentioned. The survey received 1,424 responses, which we're very pleased to share. Nearly all of the respondents agreed that parks, playgrounds, and other open spaces are important to quality of life in this community. 3/4 said that they use DW Field Park at least once a month, and 1/3 said that they used it at least once a week. So these results demonstrate that DW is a much-loved and very well-used park in the city. The most popular things that people did at the park included walking, relaxing, enjoying nature, and also taking relaxing drives. Most respondents thought there is room to improve the park in terms of general upkeep and maintenance. About 2/3 were only moderately or less so satisfied. Comments left by respondents clearly indicated that the condition of the roads, waste management, and landscaping all needed improvement. An encouraging finding from this survey is that most people feel relatively safe at the park. Only about 20% said that they felt very or extremely concerned, and of the comments left on this question, Most suggested that speeding cars, encampments, marijuana and alcohol use, and the lack of police patrols were all some of the concerns that people had. When asked what improvements were high priority, the top 3 were road improvements. You'll see a lot of that when the results come out. Environmental restoration and trail improvements as well. When asked what folks wanted to see more of at the park, they wanted to see nature programming, live concerts, and fairs and festivals. We're currently assessing the results from the survey qualitatively. There were a lot of comments that people took the time to leave, so we're going through those in detail to make sure that we accurately represent those in the final report. But when the final report is ready, within the next probably 2 or 3 weeks, Wildlands is going to make the report available publicly, and it will be on the Wildlands website, so that's wildlandstrust.org/DW Field Park. Thank you.
Good evening, President DeCastro and members. I know I'm going a little bit short. I'm going to do this. And counselors, it has been a pure, wonderful experience working with Wildland Trust. Karen and I have had a number of lunches and strategies. So happy she thought I was a Brockton High School graduate when it was my relatives, the Waldrons, who are she went to school with. But this opportunity for Old Colony Planning Council, why us? So we serve 17 communities. The other community is Avon, and many of you know Avon is part of the DW Field Park. But it's also personal. Many of you have seen me on my bike raising funds for PMC. I see you on the weekends, whether it's the morning, and I see Representative Mendez, Councilor Mendez, but many of you, but it's free. It is free. And when I heard the conversation you had previously, when you're looking for things and activities for all of the residents of the city of Brockton, all of the residents of Avon, there is no charge. And I think what Wildlands Trust has done is not only work with the city and all of you, and the mayor's office and Tim Carpenter, but has also worked with our partners to the north. We want people to come to Brockton, and the way to do that is to sustain the history and the resources that are here. And when I am on my weekends and seeing so many of friends, but I also see the diversity of our community and the smiles and the hellos and how's your day going. Those are the things that we want to continue. And having Old Colony Planning Council be part of that. Those numbers that Joanne talked, she went through them pretty quickly. I have not seen in the years that I've been working in the city, over 1,000 respondents to a survey. That's hard to do. It's hard to get 50, 60. But that shows you the dedication and the commitment that is being made to this project. So Old Colony Planning Council is happy to serve in many ways. We also host Wildland Trust a couple times a week where Rachel has an office space in our office right across the street. So thank you, and we'll be here for any questions you may have.
Councilor Azak.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank these ladies for being here this evening. We've been waiting for a while to have this resolve and introduce Wildlands Trust to the community of Brockton, because not everybody has seen you all in action. I've seen you with our youth at DW Fields Park, and I was amazed last year when I witnessed, you working with them. I got to meet Miss Gray today, but Rachel has been she's been a part of Brockton for the past year, if not more, the last few years. So I know I've seen her in action with our youth and with working with, I saw her asking everyone for the surveys over at Brockton Beer Works, and I know she got a lot of surveys that evening, but she's been working hard in the community to really to invest in Brockton, and I appreciate that as a Brocktonian. So thank you, ladies, for all you do and the collaboration with OCPC, but also with the Brockton Garden Club. I mean, I know these ladies didn't cover half of what you actually have been doing, and I know that you've collaborated with organizations in the city, and that's really amazing, and we appreciate that, and DW Fields Park is our jewel. So I think, I think more people need to look into this. I'd like our youth, I don't know if you've already hired youth for this summer, but I know the youth that were involved last year were very excited, and they were the ones that I spoke to I learned a lot about nature, and I know they were all hard at work in DW Fields Park and beautifying it and talking about beautification. You participated in our Keep Brockton Beautiful, which I was amazed to see you guys with a table there. So you've become really invested in our community. So is there anything we can do on our part to really, I know we've shared your information on social media, but is there anything else we can do to help bring more attention to what you're doing?
Thank you for asking that. I think at this point, what we would like is, as the plan begins to unfold, we would like responses from all of you about the direction that it's going in. There are going to be opportunities for some focus groups and some presentations that are going to be held by on Zoom. So we can keep you posted of those, and I think that would be really helpful for us to hear from you.
Well, thank you very much. I know the mayor is going to introduce something. I think he sent us an email for the counselors that's coming up, but to the public, I think that would be great. I'm not sure when he's opening it up to the public, but that would be wonderful. So whatever you need from us as well, we're happy to, work with you, and once again, we appreciate all that you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Tavares.
Yes. Actually, good evening, and thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Mary, for being such a great engaging in the community. Actually, I'm very tremendously excited. The most excitement, so I like number 4. When you say grow education, support and grow education. The reason why I mentioned that, we know in Brockton, most room owners, they have a lot of land or huge backyard, which I love to see them to kind of literally get engaged and involved, do some garden in the backyard, because as myself, I do have here, and then since I've been started doing 4 years ago, now all my neighbors start doing it. The reason I've been saying it, all the summertime, we eat fresh fruit, fresh vegetable. As we know, the food is all expensive right now. I think that is something such a great, if you will literally kind of engage all those people, have some piece of land, and give them encouragement and support to grow, and that's going to be amazing. I like to be a part of it as well. I'm very excited. I'm more than excited to support. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Minicello.
Thank you for coming tonight. I couldn't agree more with the statement about the quality of life of Brocktonians is definitely affected by the existence of this park. It's a unique piece of land. It's something that we all take for granted, but we really shouldn't. And it's timing is everything. You came in here on the night that we're discussing what to do with marijuana money. Okay, and to be honest with you, where so many people do utilize the park, like Mary said, to get that many people to take a survey is huge. So what I would like people to keep in mind is, what is the park used for? Well, it's used for walking, running, biking. So the trails, the roads, the paths, the fields that the kids play in or whatever, it's so important that those are maintained, that there aren't potholes, that there aren't trees or limbs across the trails, So there needs to be, I think, an infusion of resources to make sure where so many people enjoy that property. It really is, for many, on the weekends, a place to, go with friends and family and just decompress, spend time together. So it's important that we look at that resource, and if we need to invest some of this marijuana money I'm sure that the council, especially my good friend Moses Rodriguez, who wants to invest this money into things that affect the quality of life of people, because that's what everyone was fearful of with marijuana. What is going to be the impact on the community? Are there going to be people, just walking around like zombies? Are there going to be, is there going to be, problems with regard to people driving under the influence? How is it going to affect the community? Well, taking monies and investing it into the community that is going to have such a positive effect for people's quality of life in Brockton, this is a perfect way to make sure that the money is spent on the right thing. So,
Thank you.
So yeah, we support you.
Just add one
Sure.
more comment. Something I forgot to mention, we didn't have a lot of time to talk, but we just finished submitting an application to the state and to a private funder to raise $1.2 million to buy a 36-acre parcel that is contiguous with the park. There are two significant pieces of open land that are available. One of them is, right now the price is too high, but this other one...
Price is not right.
Yeah, the price is not right, but this other piece, we have an interested landowner, which is a starting point, and we had a state grant program that would fit, and we had a private funder that was willing to bring in matching funds. So even though we don't have the final word on this, it's going in a great direction, and to be able to add land to a park in that, densely populated area is really remarkable. So we're hoping that the work we're doing is going to elevate the vision for what this park can be to the people of Brockton. It's really important that cities like Brockton people have access to nature, and we're really pleased to be part of it. So thank you again for having us.
Thank you.
Councilor Mendez?
Yes. All the things that it was described in our survey are the things that we really see there every day. But what would be the timeline that we should be expecting to have the results of the survey? How much longer do you expect?
So we probably need about another week and a half or so for the analysis, and then we need to go through the peer review process internally and with Wildlands. So I'd expect the final report ready 3 weeks in terms of putting it up on the website, if not sooner. We're trying to get it out there as soon as possible.
And then what would be the next steps? Once you have the results of the survey, how does that impact all the great things that are being planned for the park?
Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, so we have a steering committee. We just had our first meeting on Friday, and the charge of the steering committee is to provide high-level oversight and really make sure that the projects that we're putting forward in the master plan do reflect what the community wants and needs, and also are feasible and able to be accomplished within a certain time frame. We also have an outreach committee who is going to continue to do outreach beyond the survey and reach out to groups who maybe have been missed in the survey. We are also working with a school called the Conway School. They're a graduate school for ecological design. We had a Zoom yesterday morning for public input on some of their conceptual designs for the Oak Street area parking lot, as well as the Waldo Lake shoreline on the western side, where folks like to feed the ducks. And that was recorded and will be shared by the end of this week on our website, as well as I could share it with all of you as well. So there's a lot coming up, but we're going to make sure that all of the input we get from the community is really driving the plans that we put forward.
Thank you so much. I know that my husband was very excited to fill out the survey, and he put up so much information, and then he kept sharing to other people, so because he loves the park. And I did watch it live when the students were presenting the project, so
Awesome.
that was awesome. Yeah, very interesting how they're trying to do a separate area for people to walk and the kids and make it safe with all the cars and speeding. So that was a great presentation. I'm glad you'll have it recorded for us to see it again, because I think they did a phenomenal job.
Thank you. Yeah, they're really great.
Yeah.
I also want to mention, since I'm up here, that we are hiring for the Green Team program, for the youth program. So the application was open in the month of May. We had 30 applicants for 12 positions, and we're interviewing now. We are going to be at the park, as well as a couple other areas throughout the city, on Tuesdays from July 11th through the end of the summer. So if anybody would like to come speak to the kids, we do have a lunch and learn opportunity where during lunch they get to hear from folks in the community like yourselves about how you work in the city and how you impact the city, and just kind of expand their horizons on what's going on, career opportunities and volunteer opportunities, anything that you might have to offer to our high school students. I'd welcome you to reach out and come speak to the kids this summer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Azak.
I think Councilor Texera hasn't spoken yet, so.
Councillor Texera, forgive me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question. We had, I think a little bit over 2 years ago, we had an accident, a tragedy at the park. What were we willing to do to make it safe, especially for the kids?
Yeah, absolutely. We do know about that, and that is an area of focus. That's one of the areas that the Conway students are looking at right now, that kind of amphitheater waterfall area where maybe there was something to do with the currents in the lake with that incident. So we're definitely looking at public safety throughout, all of these recommendations that we're putting forward. It's not just about ecology or recreation, but definitely that safety component. So we've worked and are working with the fire department and the police department as well. So we have a few liaisons there to really understand what some of the issues are at the park and how can we address those and how can we get support from those departments. It could be something as simple as a better fence or a better kind of blocking of access to the water, but I will kind of leave that up to the landscape designers and the engineers. Especially though in areas where there is like a current or something where it's that specific part of the water might not be safe. It's really important to identify that. And in addition, the city wants to maintain that there should not be water access as it stands now. So we did include if people want water access on the survey, but with those results, we'll be able to kind of address how that could be possible or how we could do that safely. But I'm rambling now, but safety is definitely on our minds.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Madam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Was there any other?
I'm just going to, did you want to say something?
Well, if everybody's asked their questions,
Okay,
yeah.
I'm going to just make a comment. I've lived here for over 30 years. I moved here when I got married, and the park always seemed like a wonderful jewel that was neglected. And I'm sure it was neglected. Funds were not spent on it, resources, for many reasons. But I welcome the opportunity to have Wildlands input and work with us to improve the park, because you're absolutely right. Open spaces in such a diverse city are crucial. They're crucial. We have to have places to relax and to walk and to enjoy nature. And so I just want to thank you for all of your efforts. I think all of us really appreciate your efforts, and we're glad you came in tonight to talk to us about it and to spread the word among the public who watch these meetings. Anyone else? Councilor.
Thank you. So once again, I thank you, ladies, and if people at home, residents at home want to learn more about Wildlands Trust, please visit their website at wildlandstrust.org/DW Fields Park. So please visit their website. It's full of information. I also would like to, I know that you ladies shared a lot of information, but you work very closely with our Parks Commissioner, Mr. Tim Carpenter, who works closely with you, who does a lot of, works hard to maintain the park, but with limited funding. But I'd also like to state that DW Fields Park has its own commission and a trust, which it's a little bit complicated because a lot of funding comes from the commission and the DW Fields Park Trust. So without talking about money, it's amazing what you're doing, and we really appreciate everything that you bring to the city. And with that being said, I would like to recommend this favorably back to the full city council.
Second.
Motion's been made and properly seconded. Councilors, all in favor and opposed? Thank you. It carries. Thank you very much.
Item number 10, resolved, be it resolved by the Brockton City Council to invite Mayor Robert Sullivan and the Chief Financial Officer Troy Clarkson to provide information and a detailed review on the city's debt position. Invited Robert Sullivan, Mayor, Troy Clarkson, Chief Financial Officer, Martin Brophy, Treasurer Collector.
Councilors, Mayor Sullivan notified me and the sponsor of this resolve that he is unable to attend. Good evening, Mr. Clarkson.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and members of the council. Marty Brophy is here. This is really a continuation of a discussion we had several weeks ago. Happy to continue that. Just to share a few things since we spoke last. When we talked about the city's debt, I delivered to you a printout of each and every debt issue that the city has. When you received your budget books last week, an updated version of that is included. So you have, in great detail, a detailed analysis of each borrowing that the city is currently responsible for and what the repayment schedule is. But when we talked about our overall position and what we'd like to do moving forward, one of the things I talked about was working with our debt advisor, that's Hilltop Securities, Cinder McInerney, who many of you met when we were doing the pension obligation bond project, and she came to this body and spoke specifically about the POB and the financial implications that would have. She and I and Marty and some members of her team have been working on an overall plan looking forward. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is to take our current debt schedule that you all have and that we have posted on the website and try to strategize and fit in a potential $150 million, $175 million in additional debt for a high school. We don't yet know what those numbers are. As we know, this Commonwealth reimburses up to 80%, but that's a little tricky. They reimburse up to 80% of whatever per square foot construction cost they deem appropriate. Right now, that's in the high $300 per square foot. So construction costs across the Commonwealth for schools are coming in anywhere to $500 to $600 to sometimes $700 per square foot. We're hoping when we actually go to construction, which will be a few years from now, that some of those cost pressures have subsided. But we're trying to be mindful of what the city's responsibility will be under that project. The declining enrollment that we've talked about recently may have some impact on the size and scope of that high school project. So what I'll talk about in a few minutes is really very conceptual at this point. But we're working with Hilltop on a plan that identifies the city's portion of any high school project at roughly $175 million. As we've talked about, again, in generalities here at this body, there's a strong desire amongst the council and the public, and certainly the mayor, to take a bold step in terms of improving our roads. So part of this financial plan that we're working with includes a $10 million road bond. And seeks to distribute those funds throughout the city. We've spoken very recently about a debt that has been authorized by this body but not yet incurred, and that's $1.7 million for playing fields. So we've included that in our projections. And Councilor Farwell has been leading an effort to potentially acquire the Brockton Fairgrounds to then master plan that and resell it. So we're also in our projections looking at a temporary debt that we would incur interest only for a couple, 3 years while the city master plans that property and then returns it to the private sector, presumably at or near what the acquisition cost was. So those interest costs are included in the projections we're working on. Probably the most important fact for us in working on this sort of debt master plan for the next quarter century is I'm working under the very clear policy guidance from the City Council and from the Mayor that you would strongly wish to achieve all of this without a debt exclusion. I understand that, and I do believe it's possible. The reason for that is even with the pension obligation bond project and taking on the $98 million in debt that we did for the public safety complex, we still have a pretty significant debt drop-off in 2037. That sounds like a long time from now, but it's not. It's 15 years from now. And there were changes the legislature made in 2012-ish, so some of the rules surrounding, I think, as I recall, it was the Municipal Opportunity Act or something like that, the Municipal Relief Act. And that loosened some of the restrictions on municipalities for temporary borrowing, and we can now temporary borrow for a longer period of time. So one of our strategies in the coming years, as we begin this school project, is to take on some of this debt, but not permanently borrow it until we have that debt drop off, to try to capture that window of opportunity and lessen the impact of all of this on the taxpayers. So it's not going to be easy, but I do believe we can accomplish all of which I just spoke about, and not have to go to the voters and ask for debt exclusion. I do have a conceptual plan that Hilltop has put together that I can share with you. It's a lot of numbers, so what I suggest is maybe we break up into small groups and come and sit down in my office, or meet individually, however you want to do it. But this could change depending on whether or not any or all of which I've just discussed is included in the actual plans as we move forward. So the debt, as I've mentioned, for the public safety building is included in the operating budget that you'll consider starting next week. Those numbers are in there. And again, and I've said this many times, but for the benefit of the public, our original plan was to temporarily borrow that money for a while. But as we saw our interest rates starting to creep up, the mayor and Marty and I made a decision to go ahead and borrow that, and I think it was a very wise decision because we captured rates when they were still low, saving the city millions of dollars in interest costs over the course of that debt. So it's rare, I should tell you, that we would even have the opportunity to discuss the scope of what we're talking about without a debt exclusion, but we're working hard to actually accomplish that. With that, I'm happy to continue the dialogue or answer any questions.
Councilor D'Agostino?
Thank you. So I filed this, and I had a few reasons for it. I'll just briefly mention that. You know, like Councilor Farwell and I were discussing before the meeting, like, as we go through a year, right, we spend a lot of time on the budget in June, right? And we pass a budget, and it's one of the biggest things we do on this body, right? And then during the year, we get asked to give money back that we cut, which was why when that started a few months ago, we had you come in and do a review of year-to-date spending, right? So that we could, before making those decisions of making transfers or reinstating cuts, look at, well, where are we? And same thing, like when we're considering, and we've approved some borrowing since the last budget, I think, nothing huge, but there were a few items that came in front of us debt-wise, and it just seemed to make sense that we also be looking at where we stand debt-wise periodically so that we can be mindful of that if borrowing questions are coming in front of us. You know, and what I had said to my colleague, Councilor Farwell, earlier is, you and I wouldn't decide to borrow money in our households or spend money in our households without looking at our budget to make sure that we could afford to pay for it, right? I wouldn't do that with my business either, you know? So that was kind of the idea, is to just kind of take a step back, kind of look at where we are. And so I have a couple of questions. There was, I think during the last meeting when we went over year-to-date expenditures, you had said, and correct me if I'm wrong, I might have misunderstood, that in general, like at the time there was the drama going on over the debt ceiling deal they just made, but it was at the beginning of that drama, the federal debt ceiling drama. And we don't have a dollar amount debt ceiling. It was more like a bond rating. If we have more than, I believe you said, 10% of revenue tied up in debt service, that is kind of the number where our bond rating would be potentially looked at negatively.
10% of the budget, yeah, not of revenue. Generally the same number, but there's a little nuance there. 10% of the budget. So 10% of your budget on principal and interest.
Okay.
Specifically in Brockton, the S&P and Moody's, the debt rating agencies, when they look at Brockton specifically, or any community with a pension obligation bond, those numbers are excluded from that, because that number was designed to actually fully fund the pension and save the city money.
All right, so that's important. So pension obligation bond is excluded. And what is that debt service? I mean, I know I have the budget, I don't have it in front of me.
So for 2024, I believe this is the number, it's about $26 million.
That is our annual payment on that, is 26
For the $300 million that we borrowed to fully fund, almost fully fund our pensions, yes.
It's 26 million each.
The entire debt service payback is included in the budget book that we provided you.
Right, but 26 million of that is just that, and that does not account when they look at our credit rating, that 26 million.
Well, it certainly counts when they look at our credit rating, but I'm just talking about when they look at the overall, what we're spending on principal and interest, debt exclusion, which we don't have to worry about here, that's that number. So when we still have to, obviously, and I'm not being facetious, we have to still pay the debt and pay the note, right?
Well, of course.
But because
that 10% figure doesn't include this 26, as far as the credit agencies or ratings agencies are concerned.
Right.
We still have to pay it, of course. Okay. All right. So again, I just wanted to get those numbers clear. So we have, our drop-off is in 2037. Can you explain to me, you know, it sounds good, we'll do temporary borrowing, but we still, and that's it, is temporary borrowing, is that always interest only?
there are sometimes some small, it depends on how you structure it, but generally, for the most part, there are some issuance fees when you issue the debt, and there's some other cost. But generally, interest only does mean interest only.
Right, and that's obviously going to be a substantially smaller payment, although you're not actually paying the debt down.
And there is no free lunch, right? When you pay interest only, the interest is still accruing on the principal, right?
Right.
But it's a way, because of the strong desire for us to pay for what we want to do in a sustainable way through our recurring revenues. This is a way, I would submit, it's the way to be able to accomplish what you want to do without asking the taxpayers for additional funds.
Okay. All right.
It's not the best way to do it, Counselor, but it's the best way to do it within
the parameters you have.
The parameters that we've set and the limitations we have based on our revenues.
Fair. Okay. And I noticed, and I don't have the year right on this, but it looks like that there is a spot, I want to say within the next 5 years, where our debt service payments hit somewhere close to 50, it's like 49 million, somewhere in there.
That far? I don't, we're certainly in the 40s in the coming year. I don't see a 49, but I can, so just you know what I'm looking at, what I keep looking down at, this is call it the prospectus, the projections that Hilltop has provided us that encompasses all of the issues that I discussed with you.
2026.
Okay.
I might be a little off on the 49.
No, fiscal 2026.
26, we hit 49.
All right, yeah, so what Marty's looking at is our operating statement. What I'm looking at is the projections, including additional debt that we would take on, which is why our numbers differ. So this includes taking on some school debt before then. This includes taking on some temporary debt for potential acquisition of the fairgrounds. It includes taking on the debt for the $1.7 million. And so I'm working on projection. What Marty's quoting, that $49 million is actual if we do none of this.
Right. If we don't borrow another dollar between now and FY26, that year we will send out approximately $49 million in payments on debt.
Right.
Okay. And that was the thing I definitely wanted to make sure I got clarification on too, because we're also talking about some significant borrowing coming up, probably between now and then you would toss that 10% number out there previously. So I guess part of my concern, and I suspect I'm not the only one, is this history. This city, unfortunately, has a little bit of a history on this, and I know it was a long time ago, but we want to make sure we don't ever go back there. And quite frankly, that mayor who took the rap, and I'm sure the CFO took some heat too, didn't do it alone. 11 people sat in this room and said yes to every dime of it, and so I guess that's part of also why I'm bringing this up too, is 11 people need to sit in this room and be a little more cautious than maybe the 11 people back then.
Well, let me be very crystal clear with you. I won't recommend anything to you that I don't think is financially sustainable. I can offer you a cosmic certainty that the mayor will not recommend anything to you that he doesn't believe is financially sustainable. What we're trying to do is fulfill the very clear policy guidance from this body that you want to be able to build a high school and do lots of other things and minimize the impact on the taxpayers.
Right.
So is our principal and interest within the operating budget going to grow? It most certainly is. But it's the only way to accomplish what you have directed me to accomplish within the parameters that we have set. Part of the reason why we did the pension obligation bond is so that we had the ability to save some money and do some other things. The reason why we were able to fit the public safety money into the budget for next year is because we had some savings from the POB that we could take advantage of, saving tens of millions of dollars in interest costs, because rather than temporary borrow and then take it on in several years at probably a higher interest rate, we took on that debt now to save those interest costs. We had that luxury, that flexibility, because of the things that we had done together. So I am not going to tell you that what you want to accomplish is going to be easy, but what I continue to tell you is that it's feasible and that it's financially responsible. And that's really important, because over the next couple of years, we're going to have lots of discussions. And I have lots of different graphs that I can show you. But the most simple and basic one is, do we have the revenues to support the debt that we're going to take on? That's the basic math equation that we all have to look at together. And right now, the answer is, in my professional opinion, can we build a $500 million high school and afford it? And the answer is yes. We're going to have to pay some interest costs that we probably otherwise wouldn't have to pay if we did a debt exclusion. But I understand, that asking the taxpayers to foot that bill in addition to what they already pay is not feasible. So in order to make that work, we're going to have to be creative. But being creative never, ever means being financially irresponsible and saddling future councils and future mayors with debt that's not responsible.
Right, and I'm not directing at you or the mayor that you might.
Understood.
It's a general.
It's a good discussion to have.
Right.
We have to have it so that the public has confidence in what we're doing together.
Exactly. On the interest-only part of this, so the other, and this is more of a question/statement, but the other part where I feel like we're playing a little bit of roulette there, and here's why I would say that. So if we borrow a sum of money on an interest-only or mostly interest-only basis for, and I don't know how many years you can do that, you tell me, is that something that can be done 10, 15, or is that shorter term? Like, what's considered short term, I guess, is my first question. Let me back up.
Now, up to 10 years.
Okay, so we do that, right? We have no idea what interest rates are going to look like in 10 years. So so we borrow at interest only. How does that work? Is it like a thing where then we have to, at that time, at the end of the 10-year interest only period, that loan has to be rewritten, refinanced? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, it can be structured in a variety of ways. So Marty will frequently come to the mayor and me, and we have what's called bond anticipation notes, or bands.
Right.
And we will borrow temporarily while projects are going on, and then when the projects are complete, we roll that into permanent financing. You can do that at any time. Right. And I'm moving aside because I always welcome Marty's input on this. You're always, when you borrow temporarily, always at the whim of the market, and rates can go up and rates can go down. In this instance, though, because we have that significant debt drop-off coming up several years from now, that's our opportunity to take on a significant amount of debt. So our choice is proceed now and borrow temporarily, and then permanently when that opportunity occurs, or wait. Right. And that's always an option that we have, is to push off some of those projects until we have that debt drop off and can borrow at that time. Right. The challenge with that is that the need is now.
Right.
So that's why I keep talking about this, so that we go into this with eyes wide open and nobody is surprised, including all of you and the public. You know, when we come to you in November or December this year and ask for $2 million to do the next phase in the high school project, which is a feasibility study. That's the first real solid commitment we're going to ask you to make on that massive project.
Right.
That money, I would suspect, and we always rely on the expertise of Marty for the final call, but I would suspect that that money will be temporary borrowed. In fact, in this phasing plan, that money is projected to be borrowed temporarily in that feasibility study. Once that feasibility study is done, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to have my back to you, Mo. Then we move into the next phase where we actually design the building and move toward construction. We're talking 3, maybe 4 years from now.
Right.
But at that time, we will have a building that will likely be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The Commonwealth will commit to a portion of that, but we'll be saddled easily with at least $100 million in debt for that project. So like I said, for the projections that I've put together, we're counting on 175, because I want to be very conservative, and I'd rather project 175 and only need 125 than project 125 and need 175.
Right. No, I think over-project is the safer bet. And before, I just want to again say, like, and I wasn't, with my comment that we're basically playing a little bit of roulette with the interest rate, that's not directed at you. It's really so that nobody, the public, nor whoever is, you know, nor us could ever say, like, why didn't they tell us? Well, they did. We're having that conversation. We knew, you know, so anyway.
No, with the temporary borrowings, it's 10 years up to the useful life of the projects. So if you're building a school or doing school construction, it's got a 30-year life, minimum 30-year life that you could borrow out. So by temporary borrowing the first 10 years, you can start the projects, you do the work. Many times when you do a council order, if it's not something that goes through the Mass Water Pollution or Mass Clean Water Trust, through the state, we do a temporary borrowing, because you want to actually borrow temporarily, get the actual amount you're going to spend, and then permanently borrow the money.
Okay.
So to temporary borrow money, it's something we do all the time, unless it's a very specific price of a project. And even then, you want to make sure, you know, that the project does get completed.
Right. Okay. No, I get all that. So getting back to, we have this peak in FY '26, and then it, from what I remember seeing on the sheet, it starts to go back down a little bit. Is there something there, like what is that? Is that something we're paying off in particular? Was there some interest only, or?
So it's the aggregate of, and we can compile a graph that shows you, that stacks it all on top of one another, but it's the composite of all of the borrowings that we have and that are listed in your book, to try to be as explicit and transparent as possible. Each individual project and borrowing has its own debt schedule, and those are all included in your book so that you can see those numbers behind the numbers. But if you'd like, we can represent them so that you see exactly how they stack up on one another.
That would be great. Yeah, if you could do that, that would be great. And then the drop-off in 37, is that a particular item, or does it just happen to be there's several items that are done at that point?
That's the pension obligation bond.
That's the pension, okay.
It ends there.
Okay.
And that drop-off was in 2028, but we pushed it off a little bit by taking on that pension obligation debt. So that previous window of opportunity that I spoke about before we did the POB was partially eaten up intentionally by taking on that pension debt.
Okay, that makes sense. I thought that something happened in 28, but again, I wasn't on the council at the time, so I wasn't really paying close attention.
2028 was the first pension obligation bond we did.
Okay.
It ends there. And in many ways, the way we structured the 300 was to kind of level it out completely. So we had an existing and then the new one. So we tried to keep the principal payments basically the same all the way through.
Gotcha.
The POBs.
Okay. All right, and that's what that drop-off is in 37, and obviously that's significant because it's, what was the 300 million, 26 million a year in payment. Right, okay. And all of those items that you talked about earlier, right? We're talking about the high school, the fairgrounds, paving. You're comfortable that, at least theoretically, right? I mean, we don't have exact dollars on any of them at this point, I get that, but theoretically, based on the estimated numbers that we're working with at this point in time, you're comfortable that we can handle that and still have, and I guess that's one of my things, is to make sure we still have a little bit of wiggle room if we have some kind of an emergency borrowing need, right? You know, the fire department comes in and has an emergency, they need a piece of apparatus right away. I don't want us to be in a position where, well, we really don't have the funding capacity to do that. You know what I mean? But
The answer to that question is yes, and one of the things we've talked about, and you'll see, is we're going to recommend the creation of a debt stabilization fund, so that when we have extra funds, the rainy day funds that Councilor Rodriguez speaks of frequently, we'll put those into that fund so that we can use those funds in subsequent years to sort of ease the burden on the general fund to be able to have both cash to be able to do some of those capital items. As you'll see in a few weeks, we held back some free cash to be able to pay for some capital items with cash so that we're not incurring extra debt. And a lot of this is predicated, what you don't see in these charts, but what we're counting on is that the continued new growth and revitalization that we're seeing will create new tax revenue that will support some of what we're proposing here. A built-out fairgrounds in a number of different scenarios could and should produce $4 to $5 million a year in new tax revenue. So the incredible construction that we're seeing in the downtown will create millions of dollars in new tax revenue. And so we're counting on that. That's over and above our 2.5%. And that additional revenue from the revitalization and the renaissance in the city will be an important part of supporting the debt that we're talking about.
Right. And that's actually a good point you made. You know, if we take on the debt to acquire the fairgrounds, that is eventually going to be turned into, as we implement the exit strategy from that, right? and sold that back off, now we've got tax revenue coming in, and that debt would have been paid off by the development, by the sale, right?
Yes, most certainly. So in the projection that we would have, in that specific instance, there's significant revenue on the site now that would continue, that would pay most of the temporary interest-only debt while we owned the property and master planned it. And then presumably, once we returned a portion or all of it to the private sector, then those new revenues would support the rest of the debt that we're talking about.
Okay, good. Good. Okay. I think right now, that is all I have, and I want to see if anyone else has any questions, too. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilor Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening again. I'll try to be brief. So I too, had questions regarding that 10% of our budget kind of cap that we talked about before. I see you said, and I didn't have that budget layout, so, and I'm trying to work a lot of this from memory of the budget book I was going through this weekend. You stated that in 2026, we're going to have basically a debt obligation of $49 million. Does that includes the pension obligation bond, correct?
Yes, is that your number, Marty? Yeah.
And that's, you
49.
said approximately $23 million.
That would include water sewer debt, which they pay for. It includes the POB, and it includes the school projects, and I mean, just any other general projects that general borrowing, public safety building. There's been some fire trucks that we have borrowed for. You know, that list of each sheet, you got to go year by year.
Right, I took a look at it just over the weekend, so I have a decent understanding, but I'm just trying to look at, number one, is that we protect our bond rating. You know, if we start getting downgraded, essentially all of our borrowings are going to increase, and so it becomes a pretty bad cycle there. So I know everybody says we're against a debt obligation, and you said we have to be very creative to make these borrowings going on to the future without a debt obligation. Fine. I mean, that's what this body and the mayor and yourself prefer. But there are some trade-offs between monies that we got to pay out short-term, like you said, some creative financing versus moving forward with a debt obligation and really putting it to the people. The high school project is one for all of our children. And so, maybe we'd want to put it in front of them to see if, what their opinion is as to taking on paying a little bit more so that our children have a secure future through a modernized Brockton High. So, but that's a discussion for all of us to have. I think when we talk about some of the debt, and we mentioned public safety, we're $175 million potentially for Brockton High. I mean, we've been talking over the last few years about putting together that capital plan. That was a $200 to $300 million capital plan. Now, obviously, we weren't looking to do everything on that plan at once, but now this, in my opinion, would kind of kick down the road, maybe considerably, some of those needed infrastructure improvements or, I mean, that's my opinion. I don't know. If you say we can do it, great, but.
Yeah, I would say no, Counselor, because the capital plan is the kind of thing that's always incremental. And so, and Marty raised a good point that I hadn't raised before, so I'm going to reiterate it. Much of the debt that we are responsible for is enterprise debt. And that's paid for out of those enterprise funds and budgeted in those enterprise funds. And so when I talk about the 10%, that's general fund, general obligation debt. And so a lot of that debt is self-sustaining through those enterprise funds. And if you look in some of the graphs that we've provided you in the past, both the water and the sewer have significant debt drop-offs coming up in the next several years as well. So we have the ability to take on more water and sewer debt and not increase the fees in those enterprises. But in the in the capital plan, you know, one of the big ticket items in the capital plan was a $100 million public safety complex that we have been able to accomplish. And I'll be before you in a couple of weeks with approximately $3 million in capital spending that we'll be able to spend cash on and not incur any interest costs. And so I believe that, and we've become very aggressive, as you know, with all of the grants that you accept. A lot of those, you know, recently we were the only community in Massachusetts to get one of these BIL grants, that SMART grant that's going to pay for a lot of the equipment for the two-way traffic improvements. That's a huge portion of the capital plan. So I think we're making really good progress at making incremental changes in those capital investments without having to ask for additional participation from the taxpayers. And of course, ARPA has been a game changer in that, and we've been able to do $50 million in investment without, other than when you pay your federal taxes every year, without asking the taxpayers of Brockton for any more.
Right, and I do appreciate that. We have been lucky through ARPA Cares and the BIL coming up in the future. You know, and I think that is a good point to make regarding our enterprise funds, because I mean, we're undergoing, I believe, a $13 million water infrastructure project right now along North Main Street, North Montello Street. I mean, and that's crucial for our city. We have pipes that are over 100 years old. So the fact that we can still continue doing those types of infrastructure projects in Brockton is going to be super important for the quality of life of our residents. And that doesn't even mention potentially Aquaria. I know we didn't get accepted this round for the state revolving fund, but we expect it to be submitted again next year, and that's also including the wastewater dryer system. So I would assume all those payments would be coming out of our enterprise funds, since those are water and sewer projects. So I'm glad there is room there for continued improvement in our infrastructure system. So you know, I'll leave it there. You know, this council does have a lot of work to do as to, you know, really making sure that the debt that we take on is not pushing out any services for our residents, and the necessary capital improvements that are and emergency borrowing, as Councilor D'Agostino said. If one of our you know, fire trucks go down, you know, we need to have some room to make some emergency borrowing. So I'm glad you're working on it, you as well, Mr. Brophy, and I just think as a body we're all just going to have to keep our eye on it, and you know, really try to accomplish some great things in the near future without really mortgaging the future of Brockton in the process. So thank you for your time, gentlemen.
Councilor Farwell.
Mr. Claxon, since you've mentioned the fairgrounds, I think it's important for the council and the public to know that that's really in the preliminary stages. The fairgrounds is about 60 acres, maybe even more, of land strategically located in the city. If we were to acquire that through a negotiated price, the first step, obviously, is to get an appraisal done on the property, and that's being done. We want to protect neighborhoods. It's located near the high school. It's located in a major intersection. The opportunity was 60 or more acres for, I was thinking, this is just me thinking, I posted on social media about this, an international marketplace where you could sell food and goods from all over the world. You could delineate parcels of land that could go for economic development, generate jobs, generate tax revenue. The real crux of the issue is, what would it cost? And I know we won't really know too much until we get the appraisal. But there's one thing that I wanted Mr. Clarkson to talk about, and that is our outside financial advisor. I think it is so important to have that person that is independent and objective and really oversees you and oversees what we do to make sure that we do not exceed what the limits of our debt should be and that our finances are in order. So could you just talk a little bit about that, our relationship with them, how long they've been here, and how they network with you? Because that's a good check and balance. Government needs checks and balances, and we need someone overseeing us because we could miss something, and we don't want to miss something catastrophic.
Excellent point. And so Hilltop Securities, and every city and town in Massachusetts has a debt advisor. A variety of companies do it. Hilltop has been Brockton's debt advisor for more than 30 years, right?
Probably closer to 30. I've been here coming up on 22, and Cinder has been there. I think she worked with Jay from the time Jay became the CFO. So she's been there a long time.
And so that's important, because not only has Hilltop been our debt advisor for decades, but the main point of contact, Cinder McInerney, who again came to visit this council during our discussions on the pension obligation bond, knows this city very, very well, because she's been our debt advisor for many, many years. And so it was actually Hilltop that put this set of projections together when I said, here's the parameters, here's what we'd like to do, how do we make it work? We then collaborate and sit down and look at the numbers and go over them and have hours of discussions, because their job is to not only advise us, but you're absolutely right, Councilor, to protect the city and its taxpayers, so that there's never a scenario that we're facing where we're looking at a downgrade. Our interest, certainly since I've been here, and I know my predecessor, has always been to protect the city's bond rating. And as you know, the feedback that we've gotten and that I've shared with you from Moody's and S&P has been very, very positive, and trending in a positive way because of some of the steps that we've taken, because of the growth in the city, because we were bold enough to do a pension obligation bond. So despite the fact that that we would love for there to be more commercial property and more revenue from that, what the bond rating agencies are telling us, and they put it in writing, is that the trends they see are very positive.
Well, in conclusion, I especially want my colleagues to know that since it's now been publicly mentioned, the fairgrounds is for sale. Everyone knows that. It's been advertised. The control of that property to protect neighborhoods, to encourage economic development, land appreciates rather than depreciates unless you damage it somehow with environmental concerns. The exit strategy, as my colleague from Ward 3 said, would always be we decide after, I assume, a master land use study, what we would want to see there, and then you would have private developers purchase it and do what the city feels would be in its best interest. So it would be a revenue-generating exercise, not just pie in the sky, as we sometimes say. So I appreciate your work on that, and I thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilors? Anyone else? Anyone else like to speak? Okay, I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second.
All right, a motion has been made and properly seconded. All in favor? All opposed? Thank you, it carries. Thank you, gentlemen.
Item number 11, resolved. Be it resolved to have Sergeant Edward Cruikshank, Chairman of the Brockton Fireworks Task Force, appear before the Finance Committee of the Brockton City Council to discuss planned activities this summer. Invited, Sergeant Edward Cruikshank.
Councilors, Sergeant Cruikshank has been planning to be here for a while. However, I received a message from him just before our special council meeting began. He's not able to be here. Something important has come up. He asked that we postpone to another date.
Motion to postpone to another date.
Okay, I'd like to postpone it to the next Finance Committee meeting.
Yes.
It's regularly scheduled.
Next regularly scheduled Finance Committee.
Next regularly scheduled.
Yes. And I've got a second on that?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor? And opposed? Thank you. Anyone have anything else? Councilor Azak.
So I would just like to remind everybody at home that we are having an ordinance meeting this Wednesday, June 7th at 6 p.m. here in council chambers. It's a very short agenda, but just wanted to let everybody know that we are having an ordinance meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Farwell.
Just very briefly to my colleagues, it's been publicly mentioned. As you know, I filed an ordinance to repeal the Stormwater Authority and to create a new entity. And there is a technical working group of the DPW Commissioner, Mr. Claxon, staff from Mr. Claxon's office, Councilor Azak, who's Chair of Ordinance, the Council President, Councilor D'Agostino, and myself. The reason there aren't 5 councilors is because that usually becomes a subcommittee and you'd have to post the meetings. The reason there aren't any other councilors, especially from the Ordinance Committee on there, because then you'd have a quorum. But councilors, we have a very serious issue. We're going to be working on it. We'll get a report to the Ordinance Committee as soon as possible and something back here. I know many of you may have received calls about stormwater billing, even on this latest one. We got to fix this. I was part of the problem. I voted for it. But now, I spoke to Mr. May today, and he said, I asked him point blank, is this a detriment to economic development? And he said, this particular ordinance that's in effect until we do something about it is extremely detrimental to economic development. So I just didn't want councilors to think that a special group was meeting. Frankly, Councilor D'Agostino was the financial guru, so that's why he was included, and I thank everyone for their patience. We'll get something to you as soon as we can. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, if there's nothing else, this meeting is adjourned.